Robin Joseph, and this is my first online support group on overcoming anxiety and depression. As most of my coaching clients know, I usually like to talk about emotional intelligence first. So, this, of course, begs the question, can emotions be intelligent? And of course, they can. For example, have you ever laughed uncontrollably or even cried uncontrollably? Both are examples of emotional intelligence. And also, of course, can we be intelligent about our emotions? And certainly both are true. So let's talk about emotion, the word emotion, what it actually means. It's actually a grammatical construct. And as you can see here on the screen, the letter E means to connote. And of course, motion means to move. So, with that being said, we also have primary and secondary emotions. So, actually, any emotion is something that moves towards or away from our bodies. And let's look at some of the examples here, like anger, for example. Anger is a secondary emotion in that you must feel a primary emotion before you can feel a secondary emotion. And as you can see here on the screen, what are some of the primary emotions? Well, it could be some sense of disappointment, some sense of guilt, shame, or grief. And then how we choose to deal with that emotion. Sadly, some people will default to a more negative emotion. Um, so, take for example, disappointment. If someone is disappointed, sometimes they will default to anger instead of empathy. And of course, it just bounces back to how we choose to manage our emotions. And I want to hear from you guys. I want to hear from about some of the things that you guys want to talk about. So let's look at a few more examples about managing our emotions and how we can begin to overcome depression. For example, if an emotion is something that moves towards or away from the body, what type of emotion does this image bring up of an abused child? For most of us, if we have not been abused, it's kind of shocking. It takes us aback. But you can imagine for people who have actually been abused, what kind of flashbacks this may bring up. And again, how are we managing that? How are we overcoming anxiety and depression? On the other hand, when you look at these pictures, they're just the cutest little things. When I came across them in the pictures, I said I had to use them because both of them are just so lovable and so cuddly that you just want to take them and hold on to them forever. And then I came across this slide. So, what emotions does this bring up? It brings up some fear, doubt, anxiety, uncertainty, and how again is one to manage those emotions. To this slide of Dr. Cosby and just the look on his face, it kind of reminds you of the phrase the weight of a stare and how even our stares can be weighty. It can cause an emotion to come towards us, like if looks could kill. And this is why I strongly suggest, whether I'm teaching in the prisons or the addiction recovery centers, that I allow the women and the men to say some of the problems that they're having about their children, but I never let them go on and on and on about things, negative attributes of their children. Because here again, we always want to speak positively of them and we always want to send out prayers and positive energy towards them. Because our emotions can fly across the room and hit someone and cause them to say, hey, wait, somebody's watching me. Something's going on. So, even much more how powerful that is when we're talking about children and parents. So, as we manage our emotions, some things are going to cause us to be depressed, and some things are going to cause us to be impressed. Okay? So, let's talk about depress a little more. Of course, that means to press down. We can also talk about repress, What does that mean? Sometimes if we're in a conversation with someone and we decide that we don't want to deal with this emotion right now, we can repress that emotion. And in some cases, we can suppress the emotion over and over again. Or we can go back and forth between repress and suppress, depending on how much time we have. If we just decide that we need to finish our workday and handle this later. But a lot of times people continue to suppress their emotions, and that's where anxiety and panic attack comes in. And we'll get into that a little bit later in the presentation. So here again, it's not usually the positive things or the things that impress that cause depression, but it's more of the negative things. Talk a little bit about how we were corrected as children. Inevitably, when I go into addiction recovery centers and prisons, one of the first things I like to talk to the young men and women about is how they were corrected as children and how that adds to how their own self-talk and how they correct themselves as adults. So let's talk about it a little bit. The difference between guilt and shame. And primarily, shame is when a parent corrects a child through shame, it speaks to a sense of their identity. When a parent corrects a child through a sense of healthy guilt, it should speak to a sense of resolve. More so, not that you yourself are wrong, but you were getting this problem wrong, and we're going to help you figure out how you can get it right. So here again, shame comes with a sense of depression. Guilt should come with a sense of impression. An impression that I'm falling short here somewhere and I need help getting that right. By the same token, shame comes with a sense of rejection, and a healthy sense of guilt comes or should come with a sense of affection. Much like here in this graphic. So we want to be careful how we are correcting our loved ones. Is it coming with a sense of affection, or is it coming with a sense of rejection? Also here are more examples. Shame can come with a sense of vexing. Guilt should come with a sense of victory. And also you can see here, a healthy sense of guilt comes with a sense of being valuable. And also it helps us to soar, whereas shame helps us to sink more so into the depression because it's more so attributed to our identity. Imagine when they have been corrected with a healthy sense of guilt, they have a greater chance of feeling valuable, feeling accepted, feeling affirmed. When they have been corrected or overcorrected or even abused through a sense of shame, comes with a sense of vexing, a sense of rejection, a sense of violation in many ways. And often that sense of correction that comes from our parents, that comes from our loved ones, that may come from our brothers and sisters, can lead to our own self-talk that continues to have some people fall into depression. Some of that self-talk sound like? It sounds like, as we talk about in addiction recovery, what are some of the tapes that are playing in your head from how you may have been corrected or overcorrected? Sometimes it sounds like, I can't do anything right. Sometimes it sounds like nobody loves me or nobody cares about me. And all of those tapes of self-talk, you have to learn to overcome them because, of course, they're not always true. But if you continue to just ride that wave of negative self-talk, it will drive you further into depression. So here again, how do we cause our esteem to rise over that sense of rejection and violation and defeat? So with that, let's talk a little bit about esteem. Of course, other derivative, esteem. So just from a purely physics definition, How do you get steam? Well, in order to get steam, you must have a consistent source of heat and pressure over time. And all of us, as we were growing up, when we were being corrected, our parents was the heat, and our parents, our loved ones, our brothers and sisters, our grandparents could have provided the heat, and our life situation provided the pressure over time. So for those of us who were corrected with a sense of affirmation, with a sense of justice, with a sense of making things right, we had a greater chance of having higher self-esteem. For those of us who were corrected with a sense of vexing, with a sense of violation, with a sense of rejection, that of course causes lower self-esteem. So how do we overcome that? We overcome the negative self-talk, and we overcome all of those feelings of rejection, depression, violation. First of all, with the words that are going on in our own head. Think about this for a second. As it says here on the screen, it takes a thought. It takes a word to overcome a thought, and it takes an action to overcome a word. So, whereas you may have heard people talk about positive affirmations, I think they're really great. But one, I ask my students to always say them out loud, to put positive things in their atmosphere, because it's the same thing, the weight of a stare. We sometimes are depressed under the weight of our own emotions, or what someone said about us, or what someone did to us. That actual weight is what's depressing us. So in order to overcome those negative thoughts, it takes a word. So if you have a list of positive affirmations, I suggest that you speak them aloud. Also, to use different Bible passages and verses and scriptures. Every time you have a negative thought, say it's nobody loves me. Okay, no, my grandparents loves me, my mother loves me. You have to immediately overcome that negative thought with a positive word. And you'll see how it's really not true. Whether it's nobody loves me or I can't get anything right, there is somebody that loves you. And there are many things that you have gotten right. So here again, we have to begin to challenge the thoughts that are going on in our head with the truth. For instance, here again, I can't do anything right. This is not true. You learn your ABCs, you learn your 1, 2, 3s. If you're of age, you got out and got a job. You learn your multiplication tables. You got up and got dressed and fixed your hair and put on some clothes, hopefully. So what are some of the other thoughts? Nobody loves me. We talked about that one already. What are some of the other thoughts? Nothing works out for me. This is not true. I'm sure if you thought about it for just a second, when you go ahead and challenge that thought that nothing works out for me, with all of the things that you know have worked out for you, it causes your hope to float over depression. And that is one of the very basic strategies that I teach young people of how to overcome depression, by getting high on life, by getting high on your achievements, by getting high on your relationships. Let's talk more about how we get our hope to float over anxiety and depression. One of the other things that I like to talk about in my group sessions are how we choose to spend our time in isolation over relation. And of course, they're polar opposites in most cases. When I hear someone say they don't like to be alone, that can be very dangerous, especially because in essence, they're saying I get depressed with my own thoughts. And I think it takes both. Yes, relation a lot of times can pull us up out of depression, but sometimes relation can pull us back down. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. So we get our hope to float on relationships. That is one of the primary ways we can start to overcome anxiety and depression. Because a lot of times Extreme isolation will bring up thoughts of bitterness, comparison, unforgiveness, and all of those things will just cause you to sink down further into depression. Um, this is why panic attacks can feel like drowning, because we're actually drowning in our own unresolved relational issues, be it our unresolved relational issues with God, with ourselves, with our parents, with our siblings, with our friends, with our coworkers. And before we know it, there's air all around us, but we can't seem to get any because we have continued to suppress and repress all of these emotions and have not had someone to come along and help us sort them out so that we can have a sense of emotional intelligence and how we begin to deal, how we begin to cope with our own emotions. So here again, how do we rise above? We rise above our relationships with God, with self, with family, with friends, and also through working. So, as we talk about relationships, what types of relationships are going to help us rise above anxiety and depression? Most often, the relationships that have a sense of thankfulness, a sense of gratitude, we want to help each other, we can be honest with each other, a sense of hopefulness, a sense of honoring God, and a sense of honoring others. Now, certainly, this is an idealistic list. Nobody is always on all of the H's that are listed here. And certainly, we can't go through life just having relationships on these H's. But often, some of us, especially my ladies and in the domestic violence situations, they will find themselves in relationships with people who literally get high on comparing themselves with others, either that they're better or they have to feel like they're better than others. They get high on hurting one another. They get high on the hoax. They get high on helping others feel hopeless and honoring themselves over others. This brings me to a point that I want to mention quickly. The last one, honoring self and comparison. When I teach parenting classes, I beg and I plead with these parents not to compare your children with one another, not to pit your children against one another. Often they're not the same age and they haven't been given all of the same gifts and abilities. Naturally, their God-given gifts and abilities, along with their age, are probably not going to allow them to compete with one another. Also, even if they're twins and they are the same age, what you set them up to do is to have bitterness and angst against the very people that they're going to have to depend on for the rest of their lives. So why even start that? And I know a lot of parents, they have been taught that the competition is going to make them better. Believe me, the competition, it can make them bitter against one another. And you set them up with the belief that I have to be better than someone to feel better about myself, which is not true. Certainly siblings, they should be thankful for one another. They should be able to be honest with one another about their shortcomings. They should be able to help one another work through their shortcomings. And when a parent comes along and continuously pits one against the other, you're driving a red wedge in between them. So when they grow up or when they mature in life, the very people that they're supposed to be able to go to and help them overcome these hurdles, they already have this bitterness and angst against one another. So, as a review, how are we overcoming anxiety and depression? We're overcoming it not through isolation, but also through relationships. Relationships with people who are going to be honest with us, who have no intention on hurting us, people who are intending on helping us, and also those who fully intend to honor God and themselves in their practices and in their relationships. I want to thank you for joining me on the journey of my first online support group, and also visit my website and let me know some of the other things that you would like to talk about. Of course, this won't be my last presentation on overcoming anxiety and depression, as I do intend to look through my emails and start to answer some of your questions in the subsequent presentations. Again, my name is Robin Joseph, and you can reach out to me at robinjoseph.com. Thanks for sharing.